And lastly, along this topic, is electricity conscious?
Everything is made of consciousness. To ask if electricity is conscious in the way that you experience consciousness, well, no, of course not. But it is made of consciousness and expresses and experiences consciousness in a completely different way than you do.
Because I know electricity would be connected with the idea of light, correct?
Electromagnetic energy, yes.
Okay, so I think that's where the question was coming from, the idea of, since the light is so written in so many of the text as far as the importance of the light, is it actually consciousness?
Yes, everything is consciousness, because consciousness is simply the expression of existence being aware of itself. It's just a reflection. So the idea is that everything is made out of that same, well, energy, if you want to say the word energy, or consciousness, but everything experiences itself as consciousness in very different ways. I'll use the word in very alien ways, very foreign ways, ways that you don't experience it as a personality in physical reality. For example, a rock even experiences consciousness, but the way a rock is designed to be a rock, and the way you're designed by yourself to be a physical human, the rock experiences its consciousness by you being conscious of the rock. So it's using you as a reflection to be aware of itself, even though it's not aware of itself directly in the way that you are. It's using you and other aspects of nature to allow itself to be aware of itself, but only by using those other aspects can it be aware of itself in a similar way to the way you consider yourself to be self-aware. So it's a very different form of self-awareness. It's a very different expression of consciousness. So yes, it's conscious, but not in the way that you are.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So we have lots of questions about spaceships and aliens and things you might be familiar with.
Maybe just a little bit, yes.
So this viewer is saying that, they've done certain protocols to be able to make ET contact, and that in doing that, they've been able to, experience a spaceship in the sky and become aware of it. And so once contact is made and there's that craft there, then what?
Well, what do you mean, then what? Keep going. Keep using your imagination. Keep coming up with other ways to let extraterrestrial beings know that you are peaceful, that you are centered, that you are balanced, that your intentions are positive. Keep going. Use your imagination. Expand the protocols. Be more imaginative. Be more creative. Be more active with them. Come up with different ways of showing those things. Artistic ways, creative ways, whatever you wish to do. But keep going. It will expand, and over time, the extraterrestrials will understand all the different ways you are attempting to communicate this idea of peaceful interaction, loving interaction, creative interaction with them, with us, and eventually it will blend into more and more face-to-face, open kinds of contact.
And that sounds fun.
Yes, of course. Why wouldn't it be?
Another question is, can you tell us about Phobos, Monolith, on the Mars moon? Was it put there? Who did it? What's its purpose? And does it have any relationship to any of the monoliths on our planet?
The idea of monolith on Phobos, one of Mars's moons, comes from the ancient civilization that used to abide there millions of your years ago, as a sentinel, as a beacon for a variety of energetic and scientific purposes. It is to some degree energetically connected to certain things on Earth, such as certain kinds of ancient obelisks and pyramids and so on and so forth. There is an energetic connection. But the idea is that it is something from a long ago civilization. It still has, to some degree, some activity within it energetically, but not really according to its original uses, since that civilization is no longer upon Mars in the same way that it used to be.
Was there anything significant about the one that showed up? Was it in Arizona or Utah?
Well, the significance is mystery. The significance is a manifestation of the collective consciousness that now is becoming more open to the idea of exploring mystery, exploring portals, exploring places that might be connected to other dimensions and other realities, so that you become more aware that there is more mystery on your planet than you may think. Because many people on your planet think, oh, we've solved it all, we've seen it all, been there, done that. Well, no, you've barely scratched the surface. So the idea is that your collective consciousness will allow individuals to create certain things and manifestations that will be more mysterious, to start pulling you in the direction of the great mysteries, so that you can really explore both the inner realities as you explore the outer realities, and ask yourself questions that you have to go to a different level to answer.
And could you share with us how the stones used to build the ancient megaliths, some weighing hundreds of tons, were cut and lifted into place?
Well, a lot of vibrational resonance, sonic vibrations were used to cancel the idea that you call gravity, to relocate the locational variable in those objects. But even though they also had certain kinds of technologies long ago that could do some of these things, a lot of the stones weren't cut. They were simply formed in the sense of dissolving them or softening them and sort of treating them more like the idea of cement or clay. So they could be put into place, formed in place, and not necessarily always carried. Sometimes they were held aloft by vibrational resonance, and sometimes they were simply formed in place. Depends on how far back you go with the technology before it was lost, before it was forgotten.
So interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about the different types of grays that we're interacting with?
Well, as we have said, there is what we call the Maz-A, which you call the typical short gray. There are the taller grays, which we call Osani, which is another hybridization level, another phase of hybridization. Now, remember that sometimes you're also dealing with gray beings and, of course, other beings that come from other parallel realities as well. So we understand that there can be a little bit of a confusing mix of things going on. They don't all blame, in a sense. They don't all come from the same reality necessarily. So you have to be a little bit discerning about what you're dealing with when you're dealing with the beings that you're referring to as the grays, because they're not necessarily all of a type from your reality, or their reality, or other realities may be involved.
One question that came up is whether or not there are factions of the grays that were actually experimented on and abducted, just like they're doing to us.
Yes, but that's another reality altogether.
So the grays that we're interacting with we're not.
No.
Subjected. Okay.
Though they did have the same Anunnaki beginnings in their own reality, in terms of being human originally.
Right. So different individuals have experienced abductions, and this individual is saying that they have trouble reconciling their feelings of being violated. And can you talk about that conundrum? Because the hybrid program is such a wonderful idea, and yet the experience of contributing to it was emotionally difficult.
Yes. The reasons that it is challenging for many people is because your society wasn't allowed to know what was actually going on so that it could participate more consciously. So the idea is that since this information was suppressed, since you were not given the ability to prepare yourselves to understand what you had chosen to participate in as a species in your own evolution, as well as the evolution of the grays in creating hybrids such as ourselves, then many of those experiences were traumatic. So the idea now is to understand you can ask to continue to experience these things on your own terms by understanding that you did agree to participate in this, even though you may not remember it, and that it doesn't have to continue to be traumatic for you in any way, shape, or form, as long as you are asking for the ability to enter these things on your own terms, experience them on your own terms. By not being afraid of what's going on, you will not experience them traumatically. And it can also bring about some of the healing of what you did experience traumatically by understanding that they simply didn't necessarily have the wherewithal, the Greys, being that they created themselves to be an emotionless hive mentality in order to succeed in the hybridization agenda. You can understand to some degree that they simply couldn't relate to what you were experiencing for quite a long time until there were enough hybrids to know what you were going through, and thus starting to temper those experiences in a much more conscious way, allowing people to be more conscious and participate on their own terms. But the idea of the trauma really comes from the fact that your own society never really allowed you to understand what was going on.
And for this other person that's to this day unable to sleep alone and still has the need to feel like there's somebody in the room when they sleep because they feel so uncomfortable when they sense the presence.
Well, again, this is simply, again, what we have just said. It's the residual of having gone through the experience without knowledge, without understanding, without conscious participation. So yes, it's a form of what you might call post-traumatic stress syndrome, because you were not allowed to know what was really going on by your own people. So the idea now is that you can alleviate a lot of that in the way that we have just suggested. By knowing that there isn't really anything negative going on per se, by understanding that you did make a choice to participate in this as part of the evolution of your own people into the sixth hybrid race, part of Earth's natural evolutionary stepping stones, and by asking for more awareness on a conscious level on your own terms, so that you know you can and always have had the ability to participate more consciously. And let go and forgive the idea of your own people preventing you from knowing this as you grew up in your reality.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
This is a little bit of historical ET information.
Yes.
A question on the topic of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
The idea that the Jewish people are perceived as a special people by others, expressed in a negative way in anti-Semitism. Does it come from the fact that they were in ancient times guided and protected by the Anunnaki, and that their religious ideas were, as a consequence, so different from the existing religions back there that they were perceived to be a small group of elitists trying to influence society?
All right, well, first and foremost, there is actually something in error about that historical recollection with regard to being so different from other people in the beginning in terms of their culture. They were perceived as different because of a more direct genetic connection to the ancient Anunnaki, which was important to preserve for the future of the hybridization agenda to allow Earth to experience its evolution in the way that would best serve it. So the idea is that there was a sensing of that genetic difference that was called out, and because of the negativity that existed on the planet at the time in seeing them as different in that way, a lot of times, again, because of the same reasons people persecute others today, because they're afraid to look within themselves and project that fear on other people when they see something different that reminds them of what it is they contain as well, but they're afraid to look at, then there is persecution. But the idea that their culture in the beginning was so different isn't actually true. The idea of monotheism is actually a very late arrival in the culture of the ancient Hebrew people. The original idea that was really quite prominent in the beginning was similar throughout many different cultures, and that is the recognition, and of course at the time, because of the way they express things, the worship of not only the male principle of the so-called monotheistic God, but also the female principle of the idea of feminine energy, the goddess energy. This was actually quite prevalent throughout the ancient cultures of the Hebrew people as well as many others. The idea of the suppression of the feminine came along much later, when those who were fear-based wanted to exercise the idea of more control over the populace for their own purposes of maintaining their power. But in the beginning, the idea of the Hebrew people was very pantheistic. They actually worshipped many different gods, and especially the idea of the god-goddess energy of Yahweh and Asherah. These things existed for a long, long time before, somewhere in and about your 530s BC, as you say, was a particular push to eliminate the feminine principle to whatever degree they could and focus everything down to a monotheistic patriarchal god to maintain the church's control as it was growing in power. So first and foremost, please understand that the idea is that the so-called beginnings of the Hebrew people were not monotheistic. They recognized the male and female principle within creation. It only became monotheistic in the way that it is now because of a power struggle that formed much later on. Does that help?
Yes. These questions are specific to Osani and the Osani people.
Yes.
The idea that there is a prime facilitator, is this something you've mentioned?
Yes. Again, it's part of the idea of an organizing body that allows for the amplification and magnification of the idea of synchronicity within a society, stabilization of a certain state of being within a society, to allow people a little bit more efficacy in having the discernment between the idea of what they do and don't prefer. So in that organizational body of service, which isn't exactly a government per se, there is what we would recognize as a prime facilitator that is the core of that particular focus of energy to allow for more ability to have that discernment and balance within the society.
And is that active as part of these channelings?
It is always involved to some degree, although the difference in degree depends on what is being done at any given moment. But of course, since it's a part of our society's collective equation of energy, then yes, the prime facilitator is always present to some degree.
So what kind of challenges do you as a people and your planet have?
Well, as a first contact specialist, obviously we have the challenge of our communications with different societies, as we are doing with your world right now. The challenge of presenting information in a way that is capable of being absorbed by those that choose to absorb it is an ongoing and very exciting process for us, because things are changing in a variety of ways all the time, and you are very different from our society, so we are always challenged to come up with more and more creative ways to express these concepts in a way that can potentially serve your society.
And for you personally, how do you allow your sculpting work to leak into your first contact work?
Well, one good example would be the idea of the creation of something we have mentioned before, which is the kind of conical tower that is very tall, made out of 3 strands of our crystalline nanotechnological material that is actually vibrationally representative of your ability to tap into the 3rd strand of DNA, which gives you more ability and more discernment to raise your vibration. So our sculpture, in that sense, in that context, is a very prime example of the vibrational energy we are delivering to you to allow you to tap into more of yourself.
And so will you eventually actually come to the planet?
I am in orbit around your planet, as I said, stationary above Sedona at this moment, but if you mean literally physically standing on the ground, yes.
And what will you do once you're here?
Well, we'll find out together, won't we? Obviously, I will be, in some sense, a representative of my society. And what that entails, we will see when it happens.
Do you have any idea when that would be?
As I said, the idea in general is that there will be others before us. We will be more toward the middle or the end of the window of open contact. So somewhere more after the 2033s or 2040s would be more likely, as the energy exists right now, for us, in our society specifically, to start making more physical appearances upon your planet. Though others will be first.
Well, since you're quasi-physical,
Yes.
how does that interact with our physical reality here?
Well, again, we have the ability to adjust our frequency to a certain point, and therefore we would appear to be mostly physical to you at the point when you arrive at being a little bit closer to us in frequency. Because we will be more similar in frequency, you'll be capable of perceiving us as solidly physical. At the same time, you will also be capable of perceiving us in our quasi-physical state as well. It will just depend upon what the moment requires.
And I suppose the ones that would be able to perceive you would be the ones that aren't going to go running screaming because their own shadow is emerging and scaring them to death.
At that point where we actually can manifest physically on your planet, obviously, of course, there would no longer be those particular attributes in the people that we come into physical contact with.
I see. So lastly,
yeah.
You've said that we are the masters of limitation. So we'd like to ask you, you are the masters of?
We are the masters of communing with the masters of limitation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Tadeo. We all appreciate you so much and the wonderful information that you share, and I hope everybody had a good time today.
And will continue to do so, because it is time for your meditation. So the idea, again, is, of course, it is our passion and our pleasure to interact with each and every one of you and all of you together, our deep appreciation for the gift you're giving us and allowing us to do so. And now, please continue to explore the conundrum we have delivered, so that you may allow your brains and neural networks to realign and reposition in a way that will make you more conducive to the great mystery